I am really looking forward to this next panel. I had a little introduction I was going to give, but I don't want to take up any of their time. The environmental justice law is one of the most far-reaching laws of its kind in the nation, if not the most far-reaching law in the nation. And it's been in operation now for a year or more in the regulations. So let's find out how it's going. I welcome to the stage our panel and our moderator, John Valeri of CSG. No, I'm not going to say the name of the firm, CSG. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
John,
How are you doing? So as Ray mentioned, the environmental justice law really fundamentally changed how public participation and decision-making occurs for several categories of facilities and permitting in essentially what are known as overburdened communities, which will be described in more detail. The landmark environmental justice law was signed by Governor Murphy on September 18th, 2020. A bill sponsored by Senator Troy Singleton as a primary sponsor, among others. After close to a year and a half of public stakeholder process, which I'm sure Sean will get into in a little more detail, DEP published a proposed rule on June 6, 2022, and the final rule was published on April 17, 2023. So we've had about a year of the rule being in effect and being implemented. However, even before the rule was proposed, the concepts of EJ review were being applied through permitting through an administrative order issued by Commissioner Sean LaTourette in September 2021. Many facilities have proceeded through the EJ process, both under AO 2021-25 and recently through the EJ rules. Not surprisingly, the rules have been challenged, and as a matter of full disclosure, my firm is representing one of the parties challenging the rule. This is not a conversation about the rule itself on its legal challenges, but its implementation, because it's here and it's being implemented, and we've now had a year experience, and maybe even longer with the AO experience. And so that's what our panel is here to address today. I can tell you the litigation is being brief, but who knows when things get decided, right? This is the appellate division. Our panel today will explore implementation. Sean Moriarty will be giving you an overview of the EJ law and rulemaking, followed by Tony Bianchini of ERM, who will be providing an overview of the public participation process. Brittany Addison of Worley, formerly Covanta, recently formerly Covanta, will be presenting her company's experiences and an overview of the implementation from her perspective and the company's perspective. And finally, we'll have Chris Whitehead of Worley, who will be providing you a little more detail on the technical analysis required to put together the Environmental Justice Impact Statement, or EJIS. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Sean Moriarty. Sean joined Archer Public Affairs this year after serving as Deputy Commissioner of DEP. Sean oversaw an organization of 3,000 environmental professionals leading NJDEP's legal team, guiding the department's legislative strategy, overseeing transactions, land acquisition, environmental enforcement policy. Sean played a critical role in almost every policy initiative, and in particular, what he's going to talk about today, the EJ rules. Sean spent many a time on video in the bunker of his garage in front of hundreds of people like myself, spending time on putting together that rule. Before joining DEP, Sean served as a Deputy Attorney General in the Office of the Attorney General for the New Jersey Division of Law. Upon joining DEP, Sean first served as the Green Acres Compliance Officer before being promoted to oversee all rulemaking as the Director of the Department's Office of Legal Affairs, and again, position of Chief Advisor for Regulatory and Legislative Affairs. So without further ado, Sean Moriarty.
Thank you, John. Should I go up here? Yeah.
Up to you. That's up to you.
Yes.
Where's the clicker? Just forward and back.
Oh, look at that. Thank you, John. Glad they let you back in the country. It's good to see you. I'm at that point in my career where the things I used to do are much more interesting than the things I'm doing. So you can thank me later for all the wonderful rules that we put out that Ray can stand up here and kill us for every couple of weeks. I am going to talk to you a little bit about the environmental justice rules, give you an overview of what the rules are about, and then some of the other folks are going to talk about how that actually plays out in real time, and I'm going to be listening very carefully to that. We created this entire thing out of nowhere, and it's going to be interesting to hear how it's working in the real world. Ray put on LinkedIn that I was the architect of the environmental justice rules, which made me wonder if I should bring a helmet to this, this presentation, but everyone's been very nice so far, so we'll try to keep that going. So as John said, September 2020, the law is enacted. We have Administrative Order 2021-25, which really attempted to kind of see through the intent of the law in advance of finalization of the regulations in April of 2023. So as John said, we've been about a year now, year plus, with the rules in effect, and the department has made 0 decisions. So things are taking a while, and I'm certainly paying close attention to when that first decision will be issued. So what does the EJ law kind of require? What do the rules require, right? So what we tried to make clear is this is not a cumulative impacts analysis, right? As Ray very helpfully pointed out during the debate around the law, is that cumulative impacts analysis is not really possible in the way that it would need to be. It's not really vetted in a way that would need to be effective from a regulatory perspective. So what we do is a disproportionate impact analysis, right? So what you're looking at are the contributions of your specific facility to environmental and public health stressors in those overburdened communities to determine whether it's higher compared to non-overburdened communities. That's essentially the kind of the core of the analysis. And what we kind of try to break down is really a 4-step process, which I'm now calling the environmental justice impact statement process, right? So that's the core of the analysis that's required by an applicant and ultimately reviewed by the department. So there's 4 pieces to that. First, identification of the baseline environmental and public health conditions in the OBC, right? What you're trying to do there is determine whether those environmental and public health stressors in the overburdened community are higher than non-overburdened communities. That determines whether that stressor is adverse, right? Adverse being one of the critical components of the analysis. Then a facility looks at kind of a facility-wide assessment of its contributions to those stressors, particularly those adverse stressors, right? What you're trying to do is determine whether you're going to contribute to stressors that are already adverse in your host community. And then as you do that, you're identifying feasible being a very important word in that analysis, feasible control measures to avoid, and where avoidance is not possible, avoidance always being the first step, to minimize contributions to those adverse stressors. And in certain situations where you have expansions or new facilities, the department is going to be asking folks to look at potential off-site or where you're not having a direct contribution off-site measures that can be put in place to lower stressor levels in the community, right? So that's kind of that's really the core of the analysis required by a facility, is looking at your contributions to baseline stressors. Where the host community is already subject to adverse stressors, or you're going to create adverse stressors, that EGIS is going to require additional information. It's called supplemental information in the rules. It's really a more fulsome assessment of the environmental and public health conditions in a community, much more robust than what's required in a non-adversely stressed community. And lastly, meaningful public participation, which folks are going to talk about. It's named meaningful on purpose, right? It's supposed to differentiate the idea of these kind of check-the-box public hearings that the department would typically conduct under most of its regulatory programs. What we're really trying to do there, what the department is trying to do there is get people into the community and have a conversation, right? So there's a couple of pieces to that are critical. First, applicant conducts a public hearing. That's changed from how we would normally have done things at DEP, where the department would hold a public hearing. It's the applicant's responsibility. That public hearing needs to be held in the overburdened community. You present the environmental justice impact statement and kind of walk through the project with the community members. 60-day public notice, and that includes a community-specific engagement plan, which is critical, right? Where what the rules ask applicants to do is to get to know folks in their community, get to know how best to speak to people in the community, and to use those methods to provide notice. That's important. It's more than just put it in the newspaper and telling the people within 200 feet. They're trying to have you identify specific modes of engagement. You also have a minimum 6-day written comment period, 30 days post-hearing, and then the applicant needs to prepare a written response to comment, right? That's all the comments that come in have to be responded to. Doesn't mean everyone has to be responded to in a very technical manner, but what you're trying to do is understand what the community's concerns are and then provide meaningful responses to those to be considered by the department. The goal in all of this is to avoid a disproportionate impact. That's a term of art that we created. Disproportionate impact occurs when you contribute to an adverse stressor in the community, or you contribute to a non-adverse stressor that creates adversity and then makes that community now subject to adverse cumulative stressors, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. Somewhat technical, and I can only go into so much detail in the couple minutes I have, but I wanted to give folks an idea of what we're talking about. Now, what's important to note here, timing is always going to be critical on these projects. All of your permitting clocks, your 45-day, or your 90-day rule, all of these permitting clocks stop while this process is being undertaken. This is a predicate to your normal permitting process, right? So being prepared, I think being proactive in moving through this is going to be really critical to getting those projects on the ground and moving forward. So where does it apply, right? There's three applicability criteria that if you've paid any attention to this, you've probably heard this ad nauseum, but I'll just run over them. Overburdened community that meets certain demographic criteria. Facilities, these cover your major air sources, your Title V sources, as well as your solid waste facilities, generally speaking, right? That's your universe. So if you're operating one of those or building one of those, you're likely to be subject to the environmental justice rule if you're in an overburdened community. And third is a permit, right? So you're either doing a renewal of a Title V, if you're renewing your Title V permit in an OBC, you're going to be subject to the rules, or you're seeking an individual solid waste, recycling, land use, water, air, blah, 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 all the department's permits for a new facility or an expanded facility, so anything that falls within that category number 2. Critically, it excludes authorizations and approvals necessary before remediation, right? The environmental justice rules are not going to affect your remedial action plans and your permits, and minor modifications to major source permits that do not increase emissions, right? So if you're going through your typical permit modification, you're not increasing your emissions, you're not going to be subject to the rules. Now, the department developed EJ map, which we find to be extremely helpful in this. Depicts all of the OBCs, shows you the baseline stressor information. If you haven't looked at that yet and you're going to be subject to this process, I would encourage you to do so. As you can see on the side, that's kind of the visual depiction of what we're looking at. We have 3,500 block groups, 4.9 million people. That's now more than half of the state resides in overburdened communities. That's where that adversity comes into effect, right? And the department's focus on communities that are subject to adverse stressors is meant to kind of shrink that universe from half the population to something a little bit more manageable and try to find more meaningful ways to provide improvements. So once that happens, the department issues a decision, right? This is critical, right? So the department's going to issue an appealable final agency action on the EJ process, right? So what that's going to do is create an interim point where the conditions the department feels are appropriate to impose in a permit are going to be identified, ultimately sought to be incorporated into later permitting, but also it will be appealable and challengeable at that point for folks who don't like the conditions that you might be getting, right? So that's a critical point, and it really creates a separate decision point. So again, looking at that disproportionate impact, right? So where you can avoid that, the department's going to authorize the applicant to proceed with the imposition of conditions that are necessary to ensure that that impact is avoided, right? To the extent that those are necessary, right? So you say, I'm expanding and I'm going to avoid contributions to truck traffic because I'm going to route in a certain way, or I'm going to use my fleet's now electric and I'm not going to be contributing to those stressors. That's likely to show up as a permit condition to ensure that that occurs. Where you can't avoid a disproportionate impact, that's where the real challenges with the law come into place, and that's where the rubber hits the road. Now, the first part of that is for new facilities. The statute requires the department to deny your application if there's a disproportionate impact unless the facility demonstrates that it will serve a compelling public interest in the OBC, right? That's a big deal, right? So new facilities, it's going to be more challenging to site new facilities in overburdened communities. You're going to need to be able to avoid all those impacts, and if not, you're going to be going through compelling public interest. Compelling public interest, we don't get into the details there, but it really is focused on core, I would say, core environmental and public health needs of a community, right? That focus on what the community needs and whether that specific facility is going to serve those purposes. That's what the department's trying to get at, compelling public interest. It's intended to be narrow, and it certainly is drawn that way. For expanded and major facilities, you're going to get, 1 minute. For source renewals for renewals and expanded facilities, those conditions are going to be focused on what is needed to either minimize those impacts or avoid those impacts, right? Permit conditions, we talked about this a little bit. Different conditions depending on whether it's renewal or expanded facility. There's also, I want to flag localized impact control technology, which is kind of the specific stationary source-focused aspect of the rule. That's where you need a good air consultant, somebody like Whitehead down there, to help you work through that. That's a little bit more challenging. I don't need to go into that. Now, free advice. So this is my free advice. This slide was blank before, which would have been a very meta way to go about this. But thanks to Danielle, she fixed this. So just kind of 6 things that if I'm you, these are things I'm focusing on. I think being a member of your host community, and I think you're going to hear this from Reworld, about how you go about doing that, right? That's going to be critical to building those relationships and understanding the concerns of your host community. I think you want to exercise transparency, right? This is about building trust and building trust with your neighbors, essentially. When you're designing projects, I would look at the environmental justice rules and determine their impact and try to design your projects in accordance with those rules. And I think the way that you design a project in the way that it impacts or interacts with specific stressors is going to be critical to how these projects move forward. For new facilities, focus on community benefits. If you're going to need to go through that compelling public interest standard, that's going to be critical. Identify other opportunities, right? You talk about the scale and the scope of this rule. It covers a very specific type of facility. That means that there may be other opportunities to develop in overburdened communities that are not those facilities. I think they're also going to force, quote unquote, opportunities to develop facilities outside of overburdened communities. I think that's going to be part of this focus as we move forward. And lastly, stay informed. The department's going to issue these decisions. They're going to issue them publicly, which is different than the way it typically issues permitting decisions, right? Each of those decisions that comes out is going to carry some level of precedent for the next decision. If I'm you, I'm paying critically close attention to how those decisions unfold and what it's going to mean for my facility and my next application moving forward. That's my time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Our next speaker is Tony Bianchini. Tony is a principal consultant in ERM's Ewing office, is a strategic communications professional with 20 years experience in helping public and private sector clients promote and successfully deliver important projects, products, regulatory approvals, and programs. Tony has experience in a wide range of corporate communications, public affairs, community relations, and crisis management issues and projects from engineering firms, corporations, public relations agencies, and New Jersey government. At ERM, Tony has helped more than 10 clients to successfully complete the AO 2120 process, develop environmental impact statements, and comply with the new environmental justice regulations. So I will turn this over to Tony.
Thanks so much, John. You pronounced my name right, which a lot of people usually don't do, so I do appreciate that. As John mentioned, Tony Bianchini, working with Environmental Resources Management, have been with the company for a couple years, and to date have worked with 11 different companies to get them through the AO process, and now working with them on their EJISs and getting them through the EJ regulations. During today's discussion, I'll take about 10 minutes, talk about how the EPA defines environmental justice and what it means to me, talk to you more about some of the minimum public notification requirements in the rule, also talk to you about the differences between the AO and the EJ rule, and the lessons that I've learned working with clients in places like Linden, Rahway, Edison, and even Princeton. And lastly, I will be talking about some ways that you could communicate with your community, but I'll really leave that to Brittany. She's got a great presentation about stuff that has been really effective in working with the community. So here on the screen is a definition from the EPA. I'm not going to read it out loud. I can tell you when I interviewed for at ERM, they asked me to define what environmental justice was, and my response was, I'm not really sure, but I can tell you this story. Unlike many people in this room, I have not worked for the DEP before, but I have worked for a couple different state agencies, including the Turnpike Authority and the Schools Development Authority. Working at both those places, I saw the type of communities that the Turnpike and the Parkway goes through. Working at the SDA, I saw the different types of communities that many children in New Jersey are living through and learning at on a daily basis, and it really struck me. Specifically at the SDA, me and my team of a bunch of other folks toured about 100 different schools in SDA communities, everywhere from Patterson to Pleasantville to Atlantic City. And we saw the type of conditions that kids were living and learning in on a daily basis. They were learning about the Civil War in buildings that were built during the Civil War in the 1860s. They had window AC units that didn't work, deteriorated floors, leaky roofs. They ate lunch in the same room that they had their gym and the auditorium. It was horrible conditions for kids to learn in. After I went on these tours, I picked my kids up for the day. I asked them how their day was at the lovely Branchburg School District, and they had a very different learning experience than the kids that I saw those days did. I was trying to teach them what my mother, Darlene Bianchini, taught me, to treat everybody with empathy and respect and try to understand the type of lived learning experience that they have. So I ask you to really define environmental justice yourself. I know it's a contentious topic, but like Sean said, it's being about being a member of your community and being a good neighbor and thinking about how you impact other folks. Next couple slides I'm going to go through are the minimum public notification requirements. The first thing is submitting that EGIS to the DEP, and they have, according to the regulations, about 10 days to review that. I've seen a little bit of leeway on that. DEP is coming up with a lot of edits to those EGISs before you submit it to the public. So once they give you approval to move forward in the process, you have to distribute the EGIS in the community to the municipal officials, the municipal clerk, possibly put it up on your website. You have to ask the town and the DEP to be involved in the process, whether or not they want to be involved in the public hearing. It's up to them. You have to publish a public notice in the newspaper, in both an English newspaper and a secondary language newspaper, for a secondary predominant language in the community. You have to mail certified letters to residents, property owners, tenants, easement holders that are within 200 feet of the property. I really would recommend you go beyond that 200 feet from your property line because it's not very far and it's not going to reach many different people. You have to post a legible sign in 2 different languages, English, and as I mentioned, that secondary language, in a location that's prominent and visible to members in the community to let them know about your information session and the public comment period around your permits. DEP talks about providing notice through other communication methods. It's not very explicit in the regulation on what exactly you have to do, but Brittany will be talking later about some great ways to reach out to your community. Then you also have to, conduct your public information session, both virtually and in person, and then have, as Sean mentioned before, there's a 90-day public comment period, 60 days before the session and 30 days after. There's some distinct differences between the AO and the EJ rule. The first is the extent of public outreach activities. Under the AO, if you had your permit in before that April 17th, 2023 implementation deadline, you were under that AO. You simply had to put an advertisement in the newspaper. You had to put it up on the DEP's website. But now they're asking for a lot more. And again, Brittany will be talking about that. You're asking the public to review the EGIS, and you're distributing it in public. So you're going to have to do a lot of education now that you didn't have to do before. Before, it was just simply talking about your permit, talking about your operations, but now you're going to have to show them and explain to them a really highly technical document. There's a difference between that 60-day comment period with the AO and 90 days with this EGA rule. And then lastly, there's the in-person versus the virtual information session. All of the info sessions I've done have been virtually. You're able to control who's chatting, who's asking a Q&A, how much time they have. Those in-person meetings are going to get more controversial, especially with a lot of different EJ organizations forming as a result of this rule. Just some quick lessons learned. Everyone hears EJ, and it gets a lot of comments about it. It seems to be that it's turned into kind of a curse word. People talk about it, and they just have a tone in their voice. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's about good community relations. It's about communicating with your internal and external audiences. You're involving a lot of different internal audiences that you've probably involved before, from legal, regulatory, operations, environmental health and safety, your communication folks. They're not going to understand what EJ is either. So you're going to have to educate them about the rule and what their role is in this. As far as external audiences, don't make this the first time you've talked to people in your community. Just like when you're asking your friend for a favor, you're not going to say, "Hi, we haven't spoken in months, but can you do this for me?" So you want to basically proactively communicate with these folks that are your neighbors. You want to develop communication materials that are easy for them to understand. Michelle and I were talking about this earlier today. We all in this room use jargon that is a gatekeeper. And we're all part of our own little club with our jargon. The general public doesn't understand the jargon that we use, the acronyms and abbreviations that we use. So you really need to break it down into almost a grade level effort. I know that when I'm working on projects, I talk to my wife and my kids about the project. And if it's too complex, if they don't get it, then I have to go back to the drawing board and change what I have to say about it. The DEP should definitely be involved in this process from the start to the beginning. If you're impacted. If you're in an EJ area, you'll probably be getting an email from the Office of Permitting and Project Navigation. You definitely want to respond to that and tell them that you're working on the effort. Then they should be involved in reviewing all of your public notification documents, your information session presentation. You should be getting their approval on your info session date, your public comment dates, and just definitely involve Dave Pepe and the Office of Permitting and Project Navigation throughout the whole process. And lastly, don't fear the public. Your comments don't have to be negative. When you talk about public comments, everyone thinks about negative public comments. You should be focusing on those positive comments to balance out the effort. You should be working with organizations like CCNJ, the BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, and getting good positive comments from them and from your employees that depend on your businesses, so you can balance out those negative comments from maybe outside parties that'll come in and try to mess up your process. Some questions here on the screen with you. As I mentioned, Brittany's going to be talking about tactics, good tactics and strategies to use. The one I want to point out here is, do you have a community advisory panel? Community advisory panel is a great way to communicate with your community. It consists of business organizations, different nonprofit organizations, residents, and nearby impacted parties. Just to close, I had one client in Edison that went through the AO process. And they went through the whole process. We worked on great stuff, and 2 people from the community showed up. We got approval from the DEP on the AO process, and then EJ map changed, how the adjacent block group changed on EJ map, and the client was told, don't worry, you don't have to go through EJ next time. They were thrilled about it, but the site manager is so awesome, he started a community advisory panel that I'm facilitating now on a quarterly basis. It consists of the library, the YMCA, the Chamber of Commerce, businesses in the area. These groups weren't talking to each other before, and now that this company is a hero because they got the community together. That's environmental justice right there, not some definition that's created. Going to turn it back over to John. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Tony. The advice about talking to your family about a case you're working on also applies to environmental lawyers who have to appear before judges, because they don't understand it either. And I know I'm on tape. Next, we have Brittany Haley-Addison, who is the Manager of Community Outreach for ReWorld, formerly known as Covanta. Brittany is a graduate of Wilmington University, where she received her Bachelor of Science in Behavioral Sciences and a Master's in Management. Brittany was with the Camden City School District for approximately 8 years, serving as a family and operations coordinator before going to Covanta as a community relations specialist in 2022. Brittany's current position is as community outreach manager, what is now known as ReWorld, and Brittany will take us through some of our real-life examples here from our employment at Covanta. So, Brittany, it's all yours.
Hi guys, so I am so grateful to be here before you guys today. They talked me up. I don't know how I'm going to live up to the hype, but we will talk a little bit about what ReWorld is doing, our best practices in communication. We will talk about our facilities, public hearings, and community outreach, which is super important. So a lot of you guys may know our ReWorld facilities, previously Covanta, they're in Camden, Essex, and Union. And with all of those facilities being right here in New Jersey, we've been through several public hearings. Our communication style is we believe in open two-way communication, even the difficult conversations within the community. It's super important to get everyone's vantage point so we can proceed and move forward. We have had neighborhood meetings, and that's just us going out in different locations around the cities that we have facilities in to make sure that we're hitting every demographic that is from the smallest of small, maybe it's schools, to even the elders at maybe some senior citizens residents. We really try to make sure that we hit everyone in a way that speaks to their technicality level and in the language that they prefer. I said that. So yeah, here are some of our things that we've done. We go on community tours often. Sometimes it's every 3 months. It may be a little sooner if we feel like there's something that we need to get out in front of. And from our community tours, we've heard that they want programming for some of the senior citizens. And STEM, in schools, they want STEM programming. And oftentimes, it's outside of just what we can do in our capacity, but they want to know how they can minimize waste, what composting could look like from a school, what an actual recycling project could look like. And even though we deal in waste, we try our best to support these initiatives in schools. We have a community benefit agreement that stakeholders from 2 sides of the city of Camden, they have access to. So that's in Morgan Village and Waterfront South. One sits directly to the left of us and the other one sits directly to the right, and we're only separated by a highway. There is programming for youth. Everyone wants the youth to be able to have fun in a safe space. Oftentimes in some of the environmental justice areas, there's a lack. Maybe there's not enough resources or good programming. So we've done a lot with supporting local nonprofits to make sure that when kids are out of school and during the summertime, they have a safe space to be able to learn, grow, and play at. We support the veterans, and that's in any capacity, and that's with local hiring of the veterans, supporting some initiatives for even housing and things of that sort, because it's super important. We have a pipeline for high school and trade school students. So if you're not interested in the college track, but you want to, see what it's like to work for a trade like us, we are able to kind of get them in and talk to them and pique their interest. And if you are interested in the college path, we have something for that too. And jobs, everybody wants us to hire local, and it's super important. We can pull from the high school pipeline, we can pull from the local community, but once they see that you're actually looking to support the community and hire local, they tell the best story. So when people come in from off the street and have no idea who Reworld is, and then they have a community member or someone in their neighborhood or goes to church with them that actually works for us, it has actually been very favorable because they can tell the story better than any of us can. So here's some of the things we've delivered on. We have monthly coalition meetings. We've done high school partnerships in some of our EJ areas, which has sent players to different locations to be able to learn about their history, learn about the history of their sport. We've also provided scholarships to some of these same people. We have some pollinator gardens. Senior citizen initiatives are super important. And to go out and give them face time, I love to do it because oftentimes they're tucked away a little bit. So they only can hear what is brought to them. And so in a way to kind of avoid any hearsay, we like to get out in front of them and give them our presentation, especially when we know that they can't always come to us and do a tour. We clean up. If you've seen us in the city of Camden, you know that we like to get out and collaborate with other partners. And we have the Harvest Fest, which provides residents of our cities with a full-blown meal and sides for their Thanksgiving holiday. So like I said before, we have a community benefit agreement. And it's just our long-term commitment with Waterfront South and Morgan Village. And it provides meaningful resources to the nonprofits of those areas, but it also provides resources to other stakeholders in the city of Camden that might not live in that area, but that does provide services to that area. There's representatives on each side of the panel, and with that being said, Morgan Village and Waterfront South, they decide how to best, who should get access to our funding and stuff. So they're in those communities, they understand what the community needs, and they are the subject experts. We are just behind it, making sure that they have what they need. job fairs. If you look at some of our pictures, you can see we've been at high schools, we've been at Berkeley College, we've been at Williamson College of Trade, where we've also hired an intern from there. So that's one of our local hiring initiatives, to get a local intern in from one of the trade schools or one of the local colleges, with the hopes that they'll stay with us forever, and they have liked it thus far. And then we also have HBCU hiring initiatives. We don't want to forget about the historically Black colleges and universities. And Tommy, she's seen in one of the pictures with me, she came from there. She started as an intern, and now she is one of our community relations specialists in a city that she has a lot of ties to. So that's been important. And then transparency. We want everyone to see our data. It's available. Yesterday's data will be available today around the same time. So you can see our emissions, and the community can see it. It's super open, honest, transparent. And sometimes people come up to us in the community and they ask questions about what happened with the numbers from the day before, or I say this might be up or this might be down. Is there anything that you can speak to? And a lot of times after the holidays, things can fluctuate in waste, and they call us out on it. We do some pre-EJ permit hearings, and with that, we go around to different sections of the city. You can see we talk to the council members, the mayor, Morgan Village, we talk to the school district, the county commissioners, of course the DEP, legislators, the Heart of Camden, Camden Collaborative, all of our partners who want and are interested in our information, but who can also relay this information to other partners that we have a hearing coming up. We want to get in front of it before the first time they hear about it is from the DEP. So we have all of these meetings, and we're able to really talk through what we're doing in a language that is reflective of who we're talking to. And our public hearing best practices is just the location, making sure people have access to it. The time of the meeting, of course, we know it has to be 6 p.m. or later. There's a virtual and hybrid option. Accessibility, if someone is hearing impaired, we can also provide that for them. And that's it. That's me. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Brittany. Our final speaker, I hope I'm not blowing everyone away here, is Chris Whitehead. Chris has been an air quality specialist for nearly 20 years. His recent work is focused on environmental justice policies, climate impacts, risk analysis, renewables development, and cumulative impact assessments. Environmental justice work has become his passion, and he holds a master's in science and environmental policy and management from American Public University, and a sustainability manager certificate from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His most recent work centers on cumulative impacts models that he's developed in southern New Jersey and Philadelphia. So I will turn it over to Chris.
John, thank you for the intro, and actually Ray and NJBIA, thank you for the invite today. I'm going to go through this rather fast because I want us to have time at the end for questions. But I always start off any EJ or climate talk I do with a version of this slide, not for the annoying bio stuff, but for the point that I was very lucky. I learned this industry from a guy who'd been doing it for 45 years at the time, taught me things that we heard today. You have to always tell your clients how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. But then they also taught me things about stakeholder meetings and public engagement, and actually referred to them as speed bumps. I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but it's just the fact that that's how we've seen these things historically. Public hearing models don't work. Each person who was interested in speaking has a small amount of time to speak. That's that, and that's the only time they ever see anyone from the site. That's not gonna foster any trust. So as you think and hear about what environmental justice is and isn't, start there. No one's asking you to change anyone's minds. Frankly, it'd be kind of arrogant to think you could. And as you go into these public hearings, I know some of these scientists and people who are accustomed to staring at Microsoft Excel all day are terrified by these things because they oftentimes encounter the impassioned stakeholder who, as someone in the crowd, he actually today was telling me they were at an event in Chicago and all these people did was scream at them the entire time. That's happening because they're thinking about their children. That's happening is because they don't get an opportunity to speak or be heard past the amount of time that you actually minimally have to. And there are various ways to communicate with these people, with your neighbors, and it's not just through the public hearings, it's also through the impact statement process. And we'll talk about that. It's really an opportunity to tell the story about what your site is actually doing. A lot of that I've worked with in New Jersey and around the country try their damn best to do as well as they can environmentally and have as modern as environmental management systems as possible. And frankly, are doing better than their public oftentimes knows that they are. So it's through that communication, putting yourself out there honestly, that goes a long way. Because the truth is, and I just got off a project working in Camden, an EPA grant, if you want to define environmental justice, it's the fact that COPD, asthma, heart disease, all orders of magnitude higher in overburdened areas than non-overburdened areas. And trying to be objective about this, it's not the fault of any one site or any one entity, but it is each site, each person, each activity going on in those locations that contribute towards it. And things like the New Jersey EJ model try to objectively untangle all of that. So we're going to go through that a bit very quickly. EJ's requirements we touched on a little bit already, so I'm not going to go through this. And all of you have probably gone through the regulations and understand what's going on. But Sean and his team have done, well, I guess past tense now, a good job about spelling out exactly what is actually needed. But again, as Sean and I have been going through the state for the past couple months, talking to different sites, the questions keep coming up about how much is this going to cost me and how long is it going to take. I can't answer the last one because of various bottlenecks with DEP, that's just taken longer than it was intended. But this should not be oppressive on a cost level. And frankly, our company has gotten an opportunity from the number of these aegis that we're currently working on because they're being overpriced to the point that they're actually affecting policy choices on site. That should not happen. If you break this down, it's all stuff we're accustomed to doing as environmental consultants. But it's a topic that stresses people out. And scary words like disproportionate impact, cumulative impact. If you step back a little bit and again try to look at that objectively, it's what is my impact on 26 stressors in this overburdened area? What are the existing demographics in the area? What's the social baseline? Things we all know how to do. The price tag for putting that together should not pop your eyes out. And if it is, you probably have a problem. And you should step back a little bit and think about that. And we've done a couple of these now under the administrative order, and we'll talk about that, and the impact statements themselves. But to this point, DEP only has a couple of potential statements out there, and that's after going back and forth quite a bit. And they identified the good things in them, but also quite a few bad things. And there's about a half a dozen or so sites that I know of right now who are also working with the DEP and trying to take them up on their offer to try and partner with them and give guidance on how to do this right. They have their challenges, but they're trying the best they can and trying to untangle all this, as I said. It's not going to be easy, guys, but there's immense value here in being proactive on the topic and actually trying to write your own narrative with the sites. With the community. If you're late to act on this, as Sean, I think, alluded to this before, there's going to be a precedent set by sites who have gone first, might not have done the best job on their impact statements, got conditions, and because they got them for a certain type of process, that sets precedent for others coming after them to do the same. You don't want that. You want to be able to go in and say, as an example, these are my emissions, actual emissions from my emission statements over the last 5 years. This is how they're trending. This is how they compare versus my potential to emit. These are my control requirements, my control equipment. Do the top-down technical feasibility analysis and show, are you doing a good job about controlling your emissions? Are you not? How old are those controls? I think the reg says if they're 20 years or older in certain cases, or 15 older in certain cases, there are various things you have to look into. But again, this is nothing that we don't already know how to do. It's not something to be scared of. And I know this is being challenged right now in courts, and Sean can't talk about it, and a lot of other people in the room can't talk about it, but the EJ law is not going anywhere. And I think it's important to people in this room to start understanding that. And I don't have a stake in the game other than the fact that once you see what these EJ areas actually are, and once you identify them and see the impacts, the various health metrics I mentioned before, personally, I feel almost a calling to try to do something about it, but coming from a project level understanding that, it's not any one individual site here at fault. We're each contributing to this stuff, but if we're gonna try to start doing something about it, you have to try and be objective. And as we talk to the communities about this, they're open to listening and hearing and learning about what the processes actually are. And the more you are actually willing to be transparent, to be open in these types of talks, that does build trust over time. You're not gonna change minds, and again, you're not trying to here, but you kind of owe it to the people in the communities to be the good neighbors like everyone says, but then also just be objective. Every site has environmental impacts, every one, even the best ones out there. What are your impacts? What are you doing about them? Telling that narrative instead of just an individual snapshot in time goes a hell of a long way. I'm gonna wrap up here so we have time for questions, but to be very honest, I owe environmental justice quite a lot in my career. There's something about it I just understand. I don't know. I come from an Arab background, like the 35 million environmental consultants in this state, but knowing where the social and environmental and the technical overlap, that's environmental justice, and it's always tied back to the public health metrics that I mentioned earlier, and the fact that none of us want this stuff to persist, but I think we're scared sometimes to admit even a small percentage of faults, I don't like that term, but for this happening. But the truth is, all of us are at fault proportionally for this happening, because it's just a system that we were brought up in. The Clean Air Act and various other regulations have done great things, but they've also allowed these types of things to happen. Now New Jersey and many other states are trying to do something about it. So with that, I'll stop.
Thanks, Chris. We are going to open it up to questions. We have people with mics around the room. Before the first person comes up, I guess I'm going to ask a question, a little bit of a curveball, maybe not, in sort of the theme of Sean's, free advice and some of the things which you should do. Maybe some don'ts, right? We've gone through the AO process. We are going through the EJ process, although there hasn't been any final permits issued. Is there any public participation things that we don't do this, we did this and it was not the right, I would do it differently. Same on the technical side. So it may be a little broad question, but I figured I'd throw that out to you folks.
I think fundamentally, and I think that the rest of the panel covered this quite well, right? Don't think or don't attempt to avoid the process, right? The process is set out in a fair bit of detail in the rules. There are specific requirements. I think it in the interest of trying to expedite a project, I would not try to play fast and loose with those requirements. I would be genuine in it, and I would follow kind of the advice that the other folks have given. That's going to be your quickest and most efficient way through this. If you try to avoid it, the department is going to make your life very, very difficult.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Tony.
I said it during my presentation, don't use jargon. Sean just said be genuine with people. The DEP has said that you have to accept public comments, but you don't need to respond to them. Just pretend you're talking to somebody one-on-one and you say something to them, they don't say anything, thank you for your comment. It definitely could railroad you if you're not going to approach people on a one-on-one basis and try to reach them that way.
And I would say, don't assume that everyone knows what your industry is and what you guys do. Oftentimes, they'll drive past your building and they have no idea who you are and what you do.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we've done a lot of the public comment packages now for Covanta and other sites. Reworld and other sites. There are sites that are higher profile that are going to get more comments, and there are some, like Tony mentioned, that don't get any. But you have to try to respond in kind. If there's a 250-page comment package put forward, it doesn't mean you have to give 250 back, but just giving a paragraph saying that the commenter is not right about this, that, or the other doesn't show respect and is going to be looked at poorly.
I think you owe Brittany $1 for getting the name wrong.
Probably up to 100 by now.
We have questions from the floor? It's a brand new program. I figured you got the guys up here to talk to you about it. Anyone has a question? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that is impossible. You're right.
I think one of the speakers mentioned maybe an influx of outside parties with outside interests, sort of complicating the process. Can you give an example? What is DEP's take when that happens? When it's clear that it's not a resident of the community, how do you address that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? And I think that there's a fair bit of consternation about kind of statewide environmental groups coming into communities and trying to advance different priorities in an environmental justice context. I think it is incumbent upon the department, and I think in some ways that the way that you respond to those comments and the way that you identify those comments can be helpful this way. But the department, and I think the rules really reflect this, the department needs to focus on the concerns of the specific community members. That doesn't mean that an environmental group cannot articulate concerns that would be relevant, but pushing climate policy and pushing other things through this process, I don't think that's going to be received well by the department, and I don't think that you're going to see conditions being put in place that address those issues if they are not directly connected to the specific and very real impacts that community members are facing. But DP is going to have to differentiate those. Had experience doing that and trying to focus us on the things that are really actually important here, because this is about localized impacts and it's about quality of life in those communities. The other things that folks want to argue about, those are addressed through different means. It's not an environmental justice issue in that way.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mentioned earlier, and one of our clients had a 250 or so page comment package submitted as part of their process by a large national group, the type we're talking about here. The problem with that process is a lot of their comments were actually wrong technically, but they're given out to the public and copied and copied and copied, so you get the same comment over and over and over again hundreds of times by a group, being sourced by a group who's not actually even involved in the area itself. So I agree, it's definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, it's like more specific. Like you're going to be able to summarize those comments. You're not going to need to, if you're getting kind of papered with form comments, you're going to be able to work through that in a way that's going to be able to be more efficient than addressing each specific one. I think that will be worked out as things move forward, as the process matures over time.
I would just say that you're not going to prevent these groups from showing up because just like all of us, they get paid to show up. That's their business to show up, right? The best example of organizing I could talk about is when I worked at the Carpenters Union. any public meeting, any township meeting, you had carpenters out there talking about how this impacted their daily life. That's why you need to get your employees out there, talk about, and you have to get local residents out there. You have to literally have these people be your third-party supporters and say, environmental justice organization, you don't even live here, get out of our room. Like, this is what we're doing, this is what this business provides. So get your supporters out there.
Yeah, and just, oh, no, please, go.
I'd like to add to that. With having a strong community outreach, like process and stuff like that, a lot of our community partners, when people try to come in from other places, they're like, I don't know them to be who you are saying they are, and we have a humanistic approach. You know, we know these people by name and the organizations by name. So with that being said, they'll push out a lot of the noise that's coming in. They don't want to hear that, because what we're doing, like I've said in the presentation with ReWorld, like, it's real life, real work. We're outside, we know the community partners, we know the community, we're in the schools, so people trust us. And with that being said, when people come out saying something, they'll ask us. And if it's a technical question that per se that I don't know, we're able to put someone else in touch. And having that ability to get someone else that has that knowledge base back in touch with the person that asked the question is extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, the trust in the relationship is always going to be key in all of this, right? If you picked up one thing from everything we've said, that's critical. Just the other part of this too, right? So like these big groups want to come in, right? And during the AO process, it's a little different. It's a little bit more open-ended, right? But as you move into the regulatory process, the baseline of information is set and is available on EJMap, right? So what you're going to hear from these groups is going to be a lot of this high-level stuff that frankly isn't going to impact what's required of a specific facility. They want to talk about how asthma rates are higher and all that. Like, that's fine and that's fair, but we already know that, right? Chris talked about it. That information is already available and it's already been quantified, right? So the responsibility of an applicant is going to be to address your specific contributions. And to the extent that an environmental group is going to be able to speak to that, I think is going to be fairly minimal. And that's going to allow the department, and I think allow an applicant to focus more directly and specifically on community concerns.
We have time for one more question. I think it's Mr. Troopin.
Situations where you truly cannot avoid that impact, and you have an expansion, not a new facility. What are you seeing being written into permit condition-wise? What are you seeing as far as agreements between the community and the facility, between DEP and the facility? What type of things are you seeing to offset those disproportionate impacts?
Sure. So I think, you know, first and foremost, you think about what the hierarchy that you have to work through is, right? So your first point is always to seek to avoid, right, in a feasible manner, and feasible takes into account costs, right? So where you can't avoid, then you're going to look at minimization, right? So then it's going to be kind of what is the facility looking at to minimize its contribution? So let's say truck traffic is always an easy one because that seems to be one folks understand, right? So you have control over a specific aspect of your fleet, comes in and out of the facility, right? So you might be looking at avoiding idling of those trucks. You might be looking at avoiding or minimizing the time which those trucks go through neighborhoods, right? You might have, and I think this is where kind of planning gets really involved. Let's say you have a plan long-term to work towards hydrogen or some sort of zero or lower emission vehicles, right? That might become a condition. Now, if I'm a facility that's doing that, I'm proposing that as part of my capital plan, so I'm getting quote-unquote credit for that, right? I'm getting that to be a condition that satisfies my minimization requirements and then also creates, as we talked about, some precedent for other facilities, right? So I think those are the types of things you're going to look at. I think from a stationary source perspective, Chris touched on it a little bit, like, you know, you're looking at how old are your control technologies, right? Are they a decade old? If they are, you're probably going to have to improve them, bring it something closer to state of the art. That's going to be the analysis department's going to work from. You know, based on what I was privy to, I don't think the conditions you're going to see are going to be completely outrageous, right? And that's why I'm interested to see when these decisions start to be issued, so folks can start to understand kind of the shape that these things will take, and I hope it'll be, frankly, less terrifying as it moves forward.
Given?
John, very fast.
Yeah.
On that point about control tech, the age is a large issue, but you're also being allowed the chance to say, okay, the controls I have are kind of old, but they're still performing very well. This is what my control percentage actually is. So there's an opportunity to make that case as well.
Okay, well, we are out of time. I think just like ECRA was 40 years ago, this is going to be a topic that's going to be repeated a lot over the next couple of years. But thank you to my panelists, and appreciate your attention.